The Fountain of Tears. A 20-meter wide and about 4-meter tall sculpture depicting the deep identification of the Father in heaven with the suffering of his people, the Jews, culminating in the Holocaust, through the sacrifice of his only begotten Son, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Seven bas-relief panels of the crucifixion depicting the last 7 things that Jesus said while hanging on the cross tower above life-size bronze figures of Holocaust victims. The panels are separated by 6 columns of natural stone, which drip slowly and steadily with the unending tears of the Father. The 6 columns stand in mute testimony to the 6 million Jews that were murdered during the Nazi regime, the Holocaust during the Second World War. A sculpture inspired by God, and first given expression in Arad, Israel, by the anointed artist Dafna Wienecke.
In the very beginning of this, I felt like there was a sense that this was not just a piece of art that we were about to do, but it was actually an intercession. And in a way, what the Lord was saying to us, that he wanted to take the number 6 million that had represented a number for the Jewish people that always represented death. It represented the Holocaust. And I thought, Lord, how in the world do I touch this creatively? And what is it exactly that you're trying to say, in a sense, from this? Because it was way outside of my grid. But progressively moving towards this work and all the struggles involved in the beginning parts of it, you begin to realize that when it says the fountain of tears, that the tears belong to the Father. We felt like responding, doing the fountain in Israel was crazy enough. The Israelis primarily, they responded exactly the opposite of what we had expected. They were the ones that were surprised, amazed, the ones always saying, this needs to go out from here. This is, in a sense, too big for Arad somehow. But in 2011, I was in Auschwitz. I've been to Auschwitz many, many times. And I was with a friend that was there for the first time. We're walking around Birkenau. It's cold, rainy, perfect conditions for being in Birkenau. And while we're there, all of a sudden, out of the blue, I felt like the Lord said to me, the fountain will be coming here.
And now, step by miraculous step, God is orchestrating the process of the Fountain of Tears being recreated in Poland, right on the doorstep of the Nazi death camp of Birkenau in Auschwitz. This new depiction, in its original size and housed in its own building, specially constructed to bring out the full spiritual impact of this work, is in the process of becoming a call and a challenge to the nations of the world, to the Jew first, and then to the Gentile. The original Fountain of Tears remains in Arad, in Israel. My name is Dan Tracy, and I have had the privilege of being able to film a part of this incredible construction process. Come along with me as I accompany Rick and Dafna, his wife, on this amazing adventure of faith and the supernatural leading of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ.
In the very beginning, when you feel like the Lord has spoken and said that the fountain is going to be coming here, was the initiating word. Walking around Birkenau with a friend of mine was his first time in Birkenau, and all of a sudden I felt like the Lord was saying to me this next step or this next phase was going to be the fountain coming here. not that you ever get used to being shocked by the Lord's communication, but to a certain degree, it was, I received it. I didn't really know what to make out of it, but I felt like I have to, obviously the Lord has to confirm this somehow. And so in a way, again, like always, I didn't really know how to respond. I kept on pursuing the confirmation of the Lord in this, but in my heart of hearts, I was really hoping that He would stop it and I wouldn't actually have to physically engage myself into it. And at one point I said to the Lord, and you're never quite sure where the prayer comes from sometimes, but I found myself saying to the Lord, if the piece of property had something to do with the dirt road, that when you come from the selection point here, the original, the longest selection point in this place, and all that entailed, to the Jews that would have been brought here personally, and what was then deemed death or a slow death for each one of them. But those that had to go to Birkenau and be marched up that dirt road, I thought, Lord, if this piece of property had anything to do with that dirt road, you would fully have my attention. And it's like, in a way, even the Lord creates the prayers sometimes. But I'd only because of the visits here and reading stuff and seeing things, I had an awareness of a significance to this place, but also to that dirt road. And now it's a part of this prayer, a prayer of confirmation somehow of the Lord. And I throw this out there, and I'm thinking, I'm getting more defined. But as things, all of a sudden, things start to open up, and I get a picture from the real estate girl, sends me an email, and it had 360 pictures from somebody standing on the lot and taking pictures. And I know the area enough physically that I thought, if I can see what's in the pictures, I will know where this is. Or at least there'll be a good possibility of some visual thing that I'll recognize. All of a sudden, in one of the backgrounds of this picture, they're standing on a road, and I can't see the road, but in the very far background of the lot, you can just see the gates, the actual gates to the entrance to Birkenau. And I'm like, oh my God, it's like, this is the gates. I know exactly where the person is standing right now when he's taking this. And in real estate pictures, it's not like you want to show the gates of Birkenau as a visual from a piece of property that you're trying to sell. So, I mean, I had to enlarge this thing a little bit, but all of a sudden I realized that the person is actually standing on the dirt road in front of this lot and doing this 360. And so it's allowing me to see the gates. And I'm thinking, the gates are the most visual of Birkenau. The gates are almost a visual touchstone to the entire Holocaust. If somebody doesn't know anything about the Holocaust, those gates have been interwoven into so many books, so many movies, so many different things. In a reflection to the Holocaust, it is the most visual image that you can get. I'm like, oh, mercy. This particular place was called the Judenrampe, which in German is the Jewish ramp. So obviously the main focus was the transport of Jews to this place from all over Europe, like 27 different countries, 27 different places. Jews would be pulled and brought almost like the center of a wheel with all these spokes attached to it. They would be brought here. And this would be their first entrance into what a lot of the survivors called the planet of Auschwitz. This would have been for them, the longest train ride was up to 2 weeks long. In getting here, you're talking days within a train car without water, without any kind of sanitary possibilities. no water, no food. So the majority of the people that arrived here were completely mentally and physically exhausted by the time the doors opened. And when the doors opened, you were greeted with strange smells. There could be ash in the air. There would be dogs barking and German soldiers yelling at you to get out. And here, within a certain amount of time, the selection was made. An immediate division between men and women. Women with small children, people who were handicapped were all put to one side. Those that had the possibility of being slave labor within the processing of the camp were put to one side. But you began to realize from this first place of selection that was operational in the course of the war for almost 3 years was that you were then selected, in a sense, what they would say life, but it was like almost a slower death in a way, to go to Auschwitz I, which is about 1.5 kilometers away from here, or you would be walked a couple hundred meters up the road onto a dirt road, and that dirt road leads you into the gates of Birkenau, which was the death camp. And I'm like, Lord, there's something really significant within this place. This is really scary. I go back to Birkenau, and within the days I'm there visiting, going back and forth to this lot, praying, all of a sudden I get a call from my kibbutz mother. And my kibbutz grandmother, this is a family that adopted me when I first came to Israel and I came to the kibbutz. This was my adoptee family that, while I'm going through trying to learn Hebrew and adjust to life on the kibbutz, they're my point of reference. But I mean, at this point, you're talking almost 30 years of relationship with them. And I begin to realize my kibbutz grandmother was 14 years old in one of these train cars that was brought in the last months of the war to this place. But at that time, the train rails, the selection wasn't made here. The selection was made inside Birkenau itself because the Germans wanted more efficiency within the killing process. And because the transport of Hungarian Jews was going to be so large, they wanted the maximum amount of efficiency. And so they created an additional line to this railroad line. And it comes off of this, and it curves, and it takes those inside the cars right inside the gates. And all of a sudden, I realize I'm getting so hit because my kibbutz mother is telling me that my kibbutz grandmother has just passed away, which was like really hard. She doesn't even know I'm in Poland when she makes the call, and I'm telling her I'm in Poland, and she's really surprised. And she said to me, are you going to be in Auschwitz? Are you close to Auschwitz? Can you lay a stone for Augie in Auschwitz? And I'm like, oh boy. It was like so amazing that these 2 points of reference, this dirt road that was the original track for those being selected from the very beginning, but the final transport of Jews into Birkenau was the Hungarian Jews that my own kibbutz grandmother was within the car itself on this line going. I have to go over this railroad line every single time I go to the property. I cross this line. And it's like I look at it and I think,
and it's like only like 50 meters from the
50 meters. The rail line is only 50 meters from the property itself. And I'm thinking, the Lord knew this. The Lord knew all of this stuff. Nothing is random with the Lord. And it's like somehow these points of reference were the main confirmation for doing the fountain here. It was wild. a lot of times when you start on a figure, you need to have a model. Because you find that if you don't have a model, usually the sculpture starts to look like you a little bit. And I felt like I wanted to have a face that would reflect the Holocaust. And so I decided one day that I would go up to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Israel and Jerusalem. And within their administrative part, they have a photo archives that they've taken close to 2 million pictures over the years that have been given to them, sent to them, retrieved from all kinds of different places. But you're talking huge numbers of photographs from any aspect at all that has a reflection visually of the Holocaust, wherever it was, whatever camp, whatever train station, train cars, anything. Some of them were actual Nazi footage, some of them were things retrieved from survivors, some of them were found in different places. But it all got sent to Yad Vashem, and for years they took all of the photography and they archived it within a specific place, and they put it on a whole computer system there. I went to Yad Vashem and I spent a terrible 2.5 hours going through all of the pictures within what they had in the archives, and I'm looking primarily for a face. And I ended up, all of a sudden, up on the screen comes the face of a prisoner. It was obviously a prisoner. He had the striped clothes, you could see it. The picture was half body, basically just below the shoulders up. And I looked at it and I thought, immediately I looked at the face, and it was like, looked like an old man with a wizened face that had been starved, but he was alive, like there was still life in his eyes somehow. And I looked at the picture and I thought, this is my model. This is my model for the Holocaust. And when you found something there, the people in the administration would make a photocopy of whatever you found. So I ended up getting this picture, the photocopy of this face, that I felt like he would be my model for the Holocaust. I go back to the studio for the next 11 months. You're sculpting in the clay all the figures that would represent then the Holocaust. You're working 11, sometimes 12 hours a day in the studio, and you're working through a frozen image, a face on this photocopy that has one expression, but you're having to create from this face multiple expressions within the figures that are going to represent the figures within the fountain. And so you're constantly referring to this face, to this visual that you have, going back and forth. And over this whole period of time, it's always there with you, within the creating process. And in the middle of this, I end up right almost at the tail end of the final figure that I'm working on. I get a phone call from a friend of mine who is leading a group to Poland, and they're visiting all the 6 main killing camps that were all in Poland. And she wanted me and 2 other Israelis to be a part of this, say, a delegation from Israel, meeting with a group from Germany and also from Austria. And that the beginning camp that we would start out with would be Auschwitz itself. That day of gathering as a group, before you actually go into the main camp, we went into a small theater and there was a 15-minute documentary of the history of Auschwitz itself. The first 12 minutes of the documentary was Nazi footage, because in a sense, they loved to record just about everything that they were doing. So you get this architected, almost like a historical processing through the creating of Auschwitz as a camp. But then the last 3 minutes is footage of the Russian Red Army that was the force that liberated Auschwitz coming in. and they had a photographer, a film guy attached to this particular unit, and he was doing the shooting of the very first things that they, as this Russian unit coming in and seeing within the camp. And for me watching this, it's almost like you could feel the emotions of the Russian camera guy. It was like there was no audio, it was all visual. And all they did, as far as for the documentary, dub a voice over it. And all of a sudden, the pictures are taking place in Birkenau, the camp, and he's focused on the back part of one of the wooden barracks in Birkenau. And I'm watching this, and the door opens, and you see a single figure that comes out of this door. And you're beginning to realize part of the information you're being given within the voice narrating is that the Nazis created a death march. There were over 60,000 prisoners at the time of liberation, or at the time when the Russians were coming in, that the Nazis didn't want to leave within the camp, and they pushed them out onto the roads and created this death march. It's the middle of the wintertime in Poland. Almost half of those that went into this death march never survived the march itself. But within all the confusion of the guards trying to organize and getting the prisoners and setting this up before they actually marched out of the camp, there was a number of prisoners that had the wherewithal to think, in the confusion, I have a possibility of hiding and not being found. And you're watching the footage as the Russians coming in, and those that were in hiding, that succeeded in hiding and not being discovered, not being killed, were hearing the Russians speaking outside of their hiding places, and we're all starting to come out. And for whatever reason, the cameraman's focused on the end of this barrack, and this figure steps out, and he's walking towards them. You know, and it's an image far away, so you're not seeing details. And for whatever reason, the cameraman just focused on this one person. He's walking up to the cameraman. He gets the figure framed about halfway, and all of a sudden on the screen, I'm seeing this face. And the face is speaking. It's wintertime, so you're seeing the breath coming out, and he's communicating something to the Russian cameraman. And I'm looking at the face, and I'm getting like this really weird feeling. And I'm looking at the face, and it's like, somehow I'm thinking, I know this person. And I'm thinking, no, it's like the information you're being given, the information you know. This is 1945. This is close to the end of the war. And I'm thinking, the information that's being given is this prisoner is 42 years old, but he looks 82 years old. And it's like, but I'm thinking, there isn't a possibility of knowing anybody. I wouldn't have known anybody within those years, but I know this face. And I'm thinking, and you're starting to get a little alarmed, and you're spinning thoughts inside your head. All of a sudden, the coin drops, and I'm looking at the face, and I go, this is my model. This is the same man that I've just spent the last 11 months with this face. And I look at it, and I'm thinking to myself, I've told people, I know this face better than I know my own father's face. I mean, every line, every single possibility of expression I have struggled with for the last 11 months, pulling from this single image of this face. And now I'm seeing him. I'm seeing him talking. I'm seeing breath coming out of him. And he's relating to this Russian cameraman. And I freak. I'm like, this is like, what are the odds? You're pulling a picture from close to 2 million pictures in this thing at Yad Vashem, and I'm thinking, God has brought me to this point of first time ever in Auschwitz, and now he's introduced me. He's given me another layer of relationship to a face that belongs to this work. That is it is the other half of this entire work. And I'm thinking, somehow this thing is so important to the Lord that he's giving me personal information about even my model. So for me, I'm like, I wanted to stand up in the theater and scream. I know this man. I don't know his name, but I know him. I've just spent the last 11 months with him. And it's like, but there he is. He's right there. And I'm thinking, no one in this group will understand what in the world. Everybody was within their own emotional world from being within Auschwitz. And I'm thinking, no one will get this. But I mean, the entire time walking through the camp, I'm thinking, where was he? Where was he in this position? And because of this, I was so convinced that God now has allowed me to know this. I have to find out what his name was. Where did he go? I know that he was liberated by the Russians in Birkenau. Is there a list of names? Is there something recorded? And because of that, every single time I was in Europe, I would always do a short flight into Poland, and I got to know people in the museum, in the camp. They have their own archives. I started to get to know people in the administration, and they kept saying to me, and they were really nice to me, and they would allow me to go through all of this paperwork, and there were lists of those that were recorded that by the Russians that were here that made a list because they needed witnesses for the Nuremberg trials. And so someone from within the camp and all this, so they were recording everything, all these names. And so I ended up over a whole period of maybe a couple of years even of going back and forth, got it down to 120 names. And he has to be. The only chunk of information I had was that he was 42 years old at the time of liberation. The camp gave me in a little file, the actual portion of him speaking to the Russian cameraman with the hope that if I could meet anybody in Poland that was connected to, say, the deaf and dumb, and they could, somebody that could read lips. And I've done it. There's a school up in the northern part of Poland I've sent the file to, connected, to see if they could read what he was actually saying, or even what language, or just tell me he's not speaking Polish, he's speaking. That would lower the number of possibilities. But I haven't gotten any response back from them. But for me, it marked this camp in particular. That interaction, it wasn't just, it was so from God, but it was a marker specifically of this camp long before the Lord even started to speak about the fountain. This was before the fountain was so in its baby stage at that point. I was just doing the modeling in the clay at that point, but it hadn't become the fountain even at that stage, but somehow the Lord knew that Auschwitz in particular would be marked, and specifically Birkenau. On one side it's awesome, and on the other side it is totally scary. Because this whole process, you're constantly reminded that you're not dealing with your memory, because I'm not Jewish, I'm from Canada, I don't even have national memory in a reflection to the Holocaust from a geographical point of view. This is all his memory. You're touching places of intimacy that only the Lord has the capability of carrying memory of every single name, every single face, but to the degree that he allows me to know something personal, even about the model. It's like totally amazing. In touching the word, my God, why have you forsaken me? People have always asked me, did you get this whole thing at once? How did this progressively start? And I would always tell them, you live with each one of these words for months on end. You go to bed with thinking about the word you're working on, where you're getting all kinds of different things from each one of the words. But when I came to the word, my God, why have you forsaken me? There was, I don't know, it was almost like a deeper place, a harder place. And I started to examine the word, and from so many different points of view, the question always within a place of suffering for most people is, where was God? Where was God when this terrible thing happened, and where was God? And it's always this expression, but now you have Jesus as the Son within his own suffering and his cry from within the crucifixion. He then expresses himself out, almost like the Son searching for the Father. And I started to look at it and I'm thinking, this is Jesus who really enjoyed the presence of the Father like no one ever will. This was a part of who he was. And the sense that now within this point of suffering, within the crucifixion, he's crying out and he's going, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I started to think to myself, the thing that got Jesus in trouble always with the religious of his day was when he would refer to God as Father. And they would always confront him and say, you're making yourself equal to God. This is blasphemy, all of these things. But within the beginning word where he says, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they do, he's referring to the relationship that he knows as Son within these words. But when you get to the point of, my God, why have you forsaken me? Even in the words themselves, there's a separation. There's something has broken in within this relationship. So I'm struggling, trying to figure out, how do I relate the crucifixion within this word? I went to a close friend of mine who is a Jewish pastor of a congregation in Jerusalem, old friend. And a lot of times when I'm struggling creatively, he was an artist before he came to the Lord, worked as a designer, architect, so he understands creative process and really relates to it. And I started to discuss with him, he also, in his past, he has people in his own family that died in the Holocaust, and so he has a very deep awareness of Holocaust memory for him personally. And I started to talk to him about the word, my God, why have you forsaken me? To try and let him know the struggle I'm having creatively with this, and to get maybe some feedback from him. Within the dialogue, he gave me a book, and the book was written by a Sonderkommando. I'd never heard that term before, but began to discover that a Sonderkommando within, again, the planet of Auschwitz was a special squad, that their job within the camps was in a way to facilitate the lie. Because in order to control the massive amounts of Jews coming in and transport, older prisoners that would be meeting the train when people were pulled from the train and before the selection, and all this point of exhaustion and confusion and all these things going on, you would, as a Jew, in the language that you would have primarily in Europe was Yiddish, and you have an older prisoner there in all the garb, and your first question then in the confusion is, where am I? What is this place? What are these smells? All of the questions that would be directed at this particular person, if he was caught by the Nazi guards giving them any kind of real information, he would be killed on the spot. And so they had to facilitate the lie. And they would have to then tell them, no, you're going to take a shower. This is just a stop. You'll be fed after the shower. As a whole group, this was the only thing anybody wanted to hear within this confusion. So then they're easily, as a group, then march to wherever they have to undress. The Sonderkommando would be there accompanying a whole group of them and saying to them, pay attention to the number where you're hanging your clothes, because after the shower, come back so you can get your clothes. They were even given carved pieces of stone, the shape of bars of soap, so that they were given almost like this was going to be soap. Again, like we've all heard, the fixtures inside the gas chamber of shower fixtures, they had to facilitate the light because they had to control huge amounts of people. Within the gas chambers, the two biggest ones within Birkenau, they could hold 2,500 people within this chamber. This had been so worked out that the killing process through gassing would take 20 minutes. But within this book that this friend of mine gave me, it's the story of the Sonderkommando that is a part of the Nazi lie, and they're going into the gas chamber, and what he records now as an old man, recording his memories from this, he would say the gassing process was 20 minutes, but for the first 10 minutes, you're talking 2,500 people compressed inside this room. When the poison is interjected into the room, the Zyklon B, and it starts to form the gas, the Sonderkommando on the outside of the door, he's saying within this book, I'll never get the voices out of my head. They will never leave me. I constantly hear these voices, these cries. He said every kind of scream, every kind of prayer, any kind of everything within these 10 minutes before the gas would silence all the voices. But he refers within his account what was heard repetitively, and what he remembered, it was said enough for him to make note of it in his memoirs, was Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? I read this, I flip. Because for me, I've told people, I'm an artist, I'm not a theologian. I'm reading this in the memoirs of a Sonderkommando from within this camp, and he's saying Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I'm thinking to myself, I didn't know this was in Psalms. I didn't know this was in any other place in the Bible except Jesus' crucifixion. I thought these words only belong to him. And all of a sudden, I'm reading in this book, these are their last words. As a sense of almost a collective cry repeated enough for the Sonderkommando to actually remember this. And he's saying this, and I'm thinking, oh, this is so verbatim. This is exactly the same words that Jesus says from the crucifixion, exactly the same words that is being cried out from the gas chambers by these Jews going through this killing. And I'm like, okay, well, how do I relate? How do I relate creatively to this? And I started to work on the crucifixion. And again, I get stuff slow. If you notice in all the other crucifixions, they all have hair and a beard. When I'm doing modeling in the clay, I always do the figure without hair, without beard. You get the body positioning, usually the communication there. Then you add things that will give it character later, expression in the face, but hair, a beard. I started to put the hair on the figure representing Jesus crucified, and it just wasn't working. I couldn't get it. And I kept putting it on and taking it off. And then I'd put it on the clay again, and then I would take it off. And I'm struggling. I'm struggling with all this. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. All of a sudden, I felt like the Lord said to me, what was the most visual mark of those going into the camps? Both male and female, within the first hours of coming into this world, if they were selected to live, the first thing that would happen to them, they'd be stripped naked, they would be shaved, their heads, and the final thing would be a tattooed number on them. These are the three visual possibilities for me to work with in trying to relate the Holocaust. This is why the figures in the bronze, their heads are shaved and they're in the striped clothes. You don't have a possibility, maybe just on the outside showing a number, but you don't have the tattoo. But when I started to relate, and I'm realizing that this word is verbatim to the crucifixion, I'm thinking, oh, I started to sink into a place where I'm thinking, the only visual marks that I can put on Jesus is a shaved head and a tattooed number. And I'm thinking, this for me, people have asked me emotionally the journey within this work, and I always say to them, the number. The number was the worst moment in the entire process. Because you have to understand this relationally. For the survivor that survives the Holocaust, survives the camp, the shaved head, the hair will grow back. The striped clothes, you can strip and burn them, and you put on new clothes. But the tattooed number never goes away. For survivors, it was always a porthole of memory back to the camps, back to everything that the camps represented for them. I know survivors that when they came to Israel, after the end of the war, they would purposely wear long sleeve shirts because they didn't want anybody to see the number. They wanted to push this behind them. But the number is always with them. It was something they could never get rid of. And so the idea that you would put a number on a figure that represents Jesus crucified was insane, totally insane. Because I looked at it and I thought, just the fact of putting the crucifixion and the Holocaust together was already totally insane within the world of Israel. The idea where Jews look at the crucifixion of Jesus from their collective memory as being the most negative image ever, because all the persecution towards them within Europe was always propagated by the church, and always under the banner that you are the Christ killers. And especially at Easter, the Orthodox Church would celebrate their Christianity by now killing those that killed our Lord. And the Jews would go through huge persecution under the banner of his crucifixion. So the idea of visually connecting the crucifixion and the Holocaust together was enough. But the idea to so mark this in the identification with the number on the arm of Jesus crucified was really bad. So when I'm feeling, again, the sense that the Lord is saying, no, this is verbatim, I want as much visual identification to the Holocaust for him as possible, I had to put the number. And I started to think to myself, okay, what number do I put? And it could have been multiple numbers. I picked 4. Could have been more, could have been less. But I decided that I would pick 1534. I was dealing more with the emotion, not with deep meaning to the numbers. So I decided that 15 together means 6, so it connects back to the 6 million, the memorial to the 6 million. 3, 4 together connects to 7, so it connects to the 7 last words that Jesus speaks. And that was as deep as it got. For me, it was just the emotion of doing it. Like so many things that I don't know and don't understand, I didn't want the Fountain of Tears in Israel when we started to be public. It was more self-preservation, I think, than anything else. But we started to have groups that would come, and then more groups started to come, and more groups started to come in different countries and different backgrounds. There were many groups that when it got to the number, people would say, oh, is there a deep significance to the number? And I would tell them in a sense, my playing with the math on this, but they wouldn't. But to try and get them to understand what I was personally going through and just putting a number on an arm of Jesus crucified, they never got that. And people would then just sort of almost casually, charismatic casually, would throw out suggestions for the number. And they'd say, maybe the year 1534, there was something significant in that year. And I'm like, okay, not to me. And then I had one lady say to me, well, the number 153, that's how many fish, after they didn't catch fish all night, and Jesus said, go out and throw your nets in again, was 153 fish. And I said to her, okay, but what about the 4? And she was just like, well, you just sort of missed it on the 4, but this is definitely the 153 fish. And I'm like, a lot of times, my Canadian side, it's easier for me to be polite. My Israeli side, it's much harder to be polite. And so you just try and hold yourself. But a close friend that was a part of a group at one point said to me, could there be a possibility that the number reflects chapter verse? And I'm like, and again, I'm not the theologian, I'm the artist. You would think this way because you're more theological than me for sure. And so I, whatever, okay. 2 days go by. I'm driving to Jerusalem, and I'm actually with this friend of mine. I hadn't given it a second thought, and all of a sudden he says to me, he says, oh, by the way, I checked. I'm like, okay, what'd you check? And he said, well, I've checked the number. I went through a number of books in the Bible, and he said, I came to the book of Mark. And he said, first of all, in Mark, there is chapter 15, and there is 34 verses within Mark. And he said, I went to Mark 15:34. He said, do you know what it says? And I'm like, no. And he said, Mark 15:34, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I'm like, I flipped. I thought, only God and my wife realizes the creative pain and struggle within putting the number there. And then somehow God decides to put a thumbprint on the act itself. Because I started to think, there's nothing random with him. Because I'm thinking in my mind, I'm just doing a little bit of simple math to symbolize, symbolically connect it to two numbers, the number 6 and 7. But I could have done 5 and 1. I could have done 3 and 3. I could have used lots of numbers to get to that end. But I picked 15:34, and then the Lord marks it scripturally exactly with the word. And I'm thinking, there's something so powerful within that sense of abandonment. Because when you see the figure that represents the Holocaust in an identification with this word, it is the only figure that doesn't face the crucifixion. It's the only one that has his back turned. Because I thought, Abandonment is total separation. Usually this kind of a cry, you're separated from everything. And so even the dialogue between these two personalities, there has to be a separation. So his back is turned, his hands are thrown behind him, because I'm trying to show, like almost every single Israeli, every survivor, every Jew that has come to see the fountain of tears, this is the thing that they always hit. Where was God? Where was he? If I even imagine that there is a being that you can attach the word God to, then I accuse. Because in a sense, I'm always saying to the Israelis, listen to what you're saying. You're not really asking a question. You're not really asking where was God. You're accusing him of abandonment. Jesus, when he cries this is a genuine cry of a son looking for the Father. But the figure of the Holocaust, he's lunging in a sense forward. His hands are behind him, almost like the word is being thrown through time. Because it's the now word. It was the exact word spoken from within the gas chambers. But again, it's the word carried through time. Where was God? And so the expression within the figure representing the Holocaust, again, it's verbatim. If you look at the face of the Holocaust, his mouth is open, the cry is going out. It's almost a mirrored image of the head representing the crucifixion. But it's the tension between the presence of God. Where was he? The one added little bit to this is that, again, Auschwitz. Because this, for me, the idea of the face of the model, but the number, were the 2 points that so, again, God identifying himself to this place of memory and to this. But only later, after going through what I went through in Auschwitz the first time and the multiple times of coming back to the camp, lots of times I would go through using a guide from the camp. It was interesting to see what perspective the guide would emphasize within his presentation of what Holocaust or what Auschwitz meant, say. But at one point, one of the guards said, only Auschwitz out of all the camps, and you're talking 6 main killing camps, but you're talking thousands of concentration camps, work camps, spread out all through Europe. But he said the only camp that tattooed was Auschwitz. And he said that I was like shocked. Because for me, the image of a number on somebody's arm is an immediate, it's a Holocaust survivor, the Holocaust. It has that impact on people, again, almost like people that don't know anything about the Holocaust, but they see a tattooed number on a person's arm, something to do with the Holocaust. But to realize that Auschwitz was the only camp that tattooed. Every camp had numbers for prisoners. Every single camp. You no longer had a name, you had a number. But Auschwitz was the only one that tattooed on the arm.
When did you realize all this came together into this physical piece of property?
Only after starting to do, in a sense, only after starting to do the work, because that's the only time when I actually start to work is the time that all these floating bits of information that, and I always call them like prophetic flags. Something goes off when somebody says something and I go, ooh, wow, didn't know that before. And somehow it gets logged in there someplace. But as you progress, and again, in the desire to respond to the Lord, and sometimes in the fear not wanting to respond. The Lord will pull these little chunks of information, and all of a sudden you go, ooh, you were doing this a couple of years ago. You were preparing ground for what you were about to drop later. Because in a way, you wanted me to remember this, because that was you, and now all these little pieces are starting to form, even in a beginning stage, a picture. And in a way, emotionally, it's easier to deal with just floating pieces. And then you can, if you feel like it with your friends, you can project all kinds of like deep spiritual stuff on that one little piece. But the idea of response to the will of Father, where your will has to break in order to respond, all of a sudden these become confirmations, because you're beginning to focus on one spot, but you're beginning to see his thumbprint on a lot of different places, and then it pushes you into a position that you go, this is for real. This was really him. He invested into this then with the hope that I would get it. And the thing that amazes me with God, he's got to be so incredibly patient. He's such an incredible Father, because we whine and we complain and we create spiritual nonsense to try and somehow do it the way we want to do it. And we'll please you, but we'll do it the way we want to do it. And we'll attach your name to it, but it's not exactly what you want, but oh.
I mean, just the awesome sense of being present here now, having this happening, actually physically happening, right here in a property that is surrounded by the history, the train, what did you call it? The Judenrampe, where the Jews actually started their journey a lot of times by foot until the end, probably walking within 20 meters of this house.
You know what freaks you out? In the middle of processing, like building, and you're up on a level and you're trying to figure out where a window will go, say in a room, and you look out, because there's no walls, so it's easy to look out, and you see a whole group of Israeli youth coming up the dirt road. It always kills, wrapped in Israeli flags.
I'd love to get that picture.
Oh, I have so many shots, because I'm like, this is payback. This is the word that the Lord gave in the beginning. This is the whole, brings it all back to the point of payback. I am going to bring life into a place that was death. And it's not just Jews walking up the road, it's youth with all their, sometimes serious, sometimes nonsense, but they're wrapped in the Israeli flag. Because I look at it and I'm thinking, this is the miracle of God. 3 years after this devastation, 3 years after Holocaust, after Auschwitz, they're not just trying as an ethnic group to heal from this incredible wound, but they become a nation. So it's not just Jews walking up, it's a representation of the Jewish nation coming up this road. Everything that those inside the camp wanted was complete erasing of who they were. Every bit of memory, that there will be no Jewish memory left whatsoever within this. It's like, it's not only Jewish memory, but the nation is reflective almost all the times. Like, I don't count how many times they've been here, a lot. But the one flag that you see always within the camp is the Israeli flag. And it's youth. It's when they do a point of memorial, it's always Birkenau. Oh, it's like there's so much amazing ceremonies of memory that have happened within this camp in a reflection of the nation. You talk about national responsibility towards then the Jewish people, but now it's the nation's responsibility in their relationship before God and how they respond to the nation of Israel. That was just pure anti-Semitism. Nobody wanted to deal with the Jews. Nobody wanted them. But now, the whole sense of how nations align themselves to the nation of Israel, it's not anti-Semitism, it's anti-Zionism that rules within most nations now. But I really believe with the nations there is a line drawn in the sand, like I mean right now. Because I asked the Lord one time, that's the one thing, there's lots of stuff I don't get, but I mean, how does God judge a nation? Almost immediately I felt like the Lord said to me, examine World War I. Take a look at World War I. And I go, okay. Every nation is defined by its borders. What happened in World War I was it was a war of empires. Ottoman Empire, Austrian Empire, Prussian Empire, Russian Empire, all French, British, you know. At the end of World War I, there was only one empire that was left, and it was England. The British Empire was the only one left. All of the other ones, the borders changed. It's like the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was huge. It becomes this couple little tiny countries that are still like arguing over, Hungarian villages now in Romania that still speak Hungarian and all this stuff. And in the Czech Republic, there's borders. It's all to do with borders. The Turkish Empire, in power for 400 years, full control of Palestine as a province. It becomes this tiny little Turkish country, and the British get the mandate then. And the British make promises to the Jewish people, going to facilitate. They break every single promise they ever made. Why? Because the empire runs on oil. And we have to not disturb the Arab countries, and so we forget all our promises to the Jewish people, a homeland, all of this. And that UN happens, and in beginning of 1948, Israel becomes a nation, and the British Empire starts to unravel completely. The empire that the sun never sets on, the big brag of the empire and all this stuff, it's like whittled down to a tiny little island where even the guys in the United Kingdom are fighting whether we're actually going to stay connected. Borders disappear, decimate. And I look at it and I think, that's how God judges a nation. It either disappears completely. Poland disappeared for 250 years. Comes up at the end of World War I as an independent nation. The biggest representation of the Jewish community, over 3.5 million, the Holocaust happens, there's only 200,000 Jews left. And it's like, Poland again, in a sense, remains a nation, but under basically the curse of communism. And all of this. But I mean shifting. World War is the definer, in a way. God makes the moment where he turns his back, removes grace in his eternal scope for only a few moments. I turn my back from you for a moment. Grace is removed, and then men become what they naturally are. Violent, aggressive, without God, no holes barred. Everybody's running to control and kill as many people as you can. But it's like it defines judgment then on these nations.